Hello there, Randy. Brian.
Hey, how you doing? I was trying to get in here a little bit earlier just in case you needed it, but sorry, I've been totally backed up. So,
No, you're right on. It's good. As you can see, Randy's here. I'm actually going to experiment really quick with a swap in headsets, just see if this improves my audio.
got it.
Uh, it's fine. Pairing, pairing, pairing. In your opinion, is this better or worse than the sound before?
Huh. It's definitely different. I don't know if it's better or worse.
Okay. Is it patently offensive?
No, no. Okay, there we go. I think it's fine. If
It's I have two dogs and sometimes they need to bark. So this will
I
have
was gonna
less.
say it seems to be just focused around you, right? Because before you could get the slight, the sounds bouncing off walls that has been eliminated. And I bet that was the intent. So,
Yeah, great. Cool. Very good. Yes. Kathleen, how you doing?
Right?
Good.
I had the lowest stress job of the day. I don't have to do anything.
Well, you're gonna have to do your intro.
Yeah, and just listen and
Yeah.
smile politely. I think I can do all of those things. Hi, Randy.
He's on
Oh, is he
mute.
not there? That's just his
I don't know
platform.
if he's there or not. Yeah. Um, oh, hey.
So we're missing the DPO leaders thing.
I know. Can't have everything. Uh, for sure.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
Do we know what kind of turnout we're going to get, Joel? Any ideas?
Well, there's 14 people already. We have 28 people who they can all hear us, by the way. We have 28 people reserved, and I am about to show the slide here. But thank you so much, all 14 of you. This is the first webinar I've ever operated, so I'll go with a cute smile every once in a while when I mess stuff up. It's my secret weapon. Uh, but we will wait a little bit. If people have Q&As, feel free to drop those in the Q&A item there. And I will. Oh,
Joel, do we have video turned off for participants?
yeah, we do have video turned off for participants, Brad. And thank you for asking a question. Now I know. And a couple more minutes for people to jump in here. And I will share our agenda. Can y'all see the agenda, Kathleen and Brian? All right, great. Well, looks like we are up to 29 participants, which is fabulous. And they're doing such a good job of being prompt. It's 6 o'clock. Amazing, everybody. Let's give them like just 1 or 2 minutes here. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature on the screen, or you can go to the link below, bit.ly/cd2questions to see them or to ask further questions. And I have a few up on my screen here, and look forward to others from y'all.
It's working well, Joel.
Oh, thanks, Randy. I'm trying.
I actually had a request by four from Jefferson County, a group of four Republicans who requested to join in, and they understood. I politely said it probably not a good idea, but they will be joining our candidate forum this coming Thursday. So
fascinating, and that's very interesting information, and I love that you have those connections. Okay, we are at 6:01. We have 30 participants, and I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to very shortly kick it off after I click a couple buttons here so that I am prepared. Oops, it's the wrong one. There we go. All right. Okay, everybody. My name is Joel Barker. I am the chair of the Jefferson County Democrats, and like you all, an active member in the party itself. I'm really happy to be putting this together. We've thrown this forum together because things are happening very quickly on this issue. The question before us is, should NAVs vote in the 2026 Democratic primary? And we put this forum together in order to discuss that. The vote will be in less than a week. How exciting this is. I wanted to start out with an introduction from Kathleen, who is the chair of the Congressional District 2 Committee. Oh, and I should say that this conversation is specifically in the context of Congressional District 2, the mighty CD2 that Kathleen chairs the Democratic Party's committee for. So, Kathleen?
Hi, I'm so glad y'all joined. I know we have conflicts. We have conflicts with the DPO, but this seemed like such an important question. We only have a few days to decide how folks want to vote on it, whether parties or groups, allies want to endorse or oppose this resolution. So I'm deeply appreciative of the work that Randy and Joel and Brian have done in putting together the information that people need and being willing to answer the tough questions. And hopefully we'll be way better informed coming out the other side. I know I will be. So thank you all. That's all for me.
Wonderful. So now I'm going to go over a little bit of the situation that we're looking at, and hopefully I sent out enough information. If you have questions, once again, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we'll be as dynamic as we can about it. But here up on the screen is the proposal that is at the bottom of the resolution that we'll be voting on. And it is that the Democratic Party of Oregon shall open the 2026 primary to non-affiliated voters who request a Democratic ballot. The DPO chair will notify the Secretary of State to implement this change, excluding PCP elections by December the 31st of 2025. That's very soon. Now, Section 2 is the DPO will conduct outreach to inform Oregonians that non-affiliated voters are invited to participate in the 2026 Democratic primary. I put together a short link there if you want to find the whole resolution, or you can go to dpo.org/SCC and fish through there. A little QR code if you want to snap that too. Now, what does this mean, particularly in CD2? All across the nation, non-affiliated voters are a growing population. Less and less people are joining the major parties. In Oregon, we have the famous motor voter bill that made it so that people could very easily register to vote when they got a license, but they could not actually choose a party at that time. You'd have to go back. And so as a result, we increased the non-affiliated voters dramatically after that. In Congressional District 2, the rural eastern part of Oregon, it's quite marked. 37% of all voters in CD2 are non-affiliated. That's more than there are Republicans. In Baker County, you can see that Democrats are even less of a percentage there at the bottom. This is not the first place that this idea has been proposed. There's 19 states that have, in one way or another, the ability for people to vote in a primary regardless of whether they're a member of the party or not. And so I've listed them here. Many of them have been this way for a very, very long time. Interestingly, it raises all sorts of questions as to what impact it will have on elections, what impact it will have on votes. And that's what we're here to talk with Brian Smith about. So the format of this from here forward is that Brian's going to introduce the situation, and then I have a few follow-up questions that I've shared with him in advance for him to look through. And then we'll go into audience questions. We've had a form out for quite a while that people have put questions into. I'd love to see more in the Q&A, things that you're inspired to hear. So with that, I'm going to introduce Brian. Now, Brian, him, is a citizen of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. He was born and grew up in Arizona. After going to school in the Midwest, he transferred to Southern Oregon University, also my alma mater, in Ashland and studied mathematics and economics. He's worked in electoral politics in Oregon since 2006. In recent years, Brian has had the opportunity to focus more on issues of equity and believes the greatest barriers to voters and candidates from tribal communities are institutional and systemic in nature. This has led him to co-found the Tribal Democracy Project with the mission of promoting democratic reforms and implementing civics education and get out the vote programs in tribal communities. Brian, can you give us a little point of view that you have on this idea of these open primaries?
Yeah, and thanks for the introduction, because it actually kind of helps tell folks where I'm coming from. The formation of Tribal Democracy Project was informed by our experiences, a number of us, with tribal candidates, right? Trying to get elected, particularly on the Warm Springs community in Jefferson County. But also all over the place, whether it's, the Klamath tribal community and a lot of areas throughout the second congressional district, you have multiple tribes that are in rural communities. And one of the things that we notice is like, a lot of the candidates coming out, and here where this is a great venue because a lot of times I got to have to tiptoe around the politics as a nonpartisan organization. But the bottom line is a lot of candidates, whether in the past from the Klamath Tribes, Taylor Tupper, we had some candidates from Warm Springs. These are Democrats. In these communities, vote Democratic, but they're just in areas where it is too difficult to get elected. And also, a lot of communities are disenfranchised and very, very um, low turnout in voting. So all of these issues essentially was like, from my end, like how do we get folks elected? And what are systems in place and there's no silver bullet reform, but what are systems in place to tweak or change to make it easier? And so that's where we were coming from on this. And we think there's some common themes here. Um, in order to get tribal candidates elected, we've got to make it easier to get Democrats elected in rural Oregon, right? And that's kind of where we're coming from in our perspective. I don't push that out so much, but that's just you look at the numbers, and that's just empirically what party are the candidates in? How do communities vote? What are their voter preferences, right? So, with that, looking at the upsides that we see. There are different kinds of open primaries, and I think you're going to address that later with a question. We're talking about specifically this kind of primary, right? Open primary, where you let non-affiliated voters vote in a Democratic primary, and it's a test case, right? This is for a one-time thing to test it out. This isn't permanent, so but we think that overall, this is a good reform. The first reason for it is just voter enfranchisement, giving access to an election to folks who normally wouldn't have access. We have lots of reasons why this is good, but that's not actually what I'm here going to focus on. I'm going to go to the next point is what is the objective, or what do you all think the objective is of the Democratic Party, right? Um, I think the objective is to get Democrats elected. It's a policy imperatives at the legislative level or local level. And Democrats fit our values, right? Getting folks elected who fit our values and getting them elected in the first place. So if we're thinking about that as our objective, that's where I think we should work from, at least my view, on evaluating whether an open primary to non-affiliated voters is a good idea. And I do say Democrats and policies, right? And kind of it's a little mix of both. We don't, I think, as Democrats, we want to think about who we are, and there's a spectrum, right? It's a big tent party, but overall, we want to make sure. My view is that the Democrats that are elected fit that big tent somewhere in the spectrum, right? No. Um, so that's the objective. Um, we the other thing we want to think about, coupled with that objective, is the nature of non-affiliated voters. Um, a couple things on that. I think who non-affiliated voters are and how they vote. This is not homogenous, right? It's just not one huge sum of folks who are swing voters or necessarily fit a certain political ideology. Non-affiliated voters are just like Republicans and Democrats, except they are not registered as Republicans and Democrats. Also, they're not as engaged. Republicans and Democrats vote in higher numbers. So there are those couple of key features. But when folks do vote, and when they're most likely to vote, we're talking about general elections and then presidential year general elections, they tend to track just like Republicans and Democrats. It just depends on where they live and who they're around, right? They just chose to not um, live in a political party, right? But in CD2, if you go to Ashland and talk to a non-affiliated voter, that is a very, very left-wing voter, right? Whereas if you go, to Baker County, it's probably someone who's more on the right, right? So really, it's a mixed bag. Also, another thing about non-affiliated voters, you have a lot of POC communities, particularly Native and Latino communities in the second congressional district. And these communities are disproportionately non-affiliated. Um, If you look at where in the second district a lot of your large chunks are of non-affiliated voters, obviously Jackson County is the biggest county, so there's somewhere around like 50,000, right? But then you have Josephine County, Klamath County, and I believe Umatilla County. There's a large, like 20,000-ish, something like that. These are probably a lot of Hispanic voters, right? Now, when you go to Warm Springs and those precincts, there are a couple thousand Native American voters. Um, Something like 50, 60% of the folks are not affiliated there, right? We can get to numbers overall, I think, with another question. So, given that this is what folks look like, we think what opening this primary, the way I worded it is creating an incentive system to meet voters where they are, right? So we have this trend line where folks are increasingly becoming non-affiliated, and this was happening before automatic registration in January of 2016. There was already this trend line, and then it just blew up after that, right? Where everybody, if you're in the DMV system, you automatically get registered to vote, right? Unless you opt out. Most people don't opt out, right? Um, then we got to a place where I think around over 90% of residents in Oregon who can vote are registered to vote now, right? But under this system, the current system with the closed primary, knowing that a lot of these folks who are essentially are not allowed to engage in this system, what the incentive system does when you open this up is it's not as much about incentives, it's more about opportunities for candidates to go in and really start talking to these voters and finding out who's who. There are a number, couple different things where these opportunities come in where when you engage non-affiliated voters more and you have a structure that's set up where candidates are allowed to do that. It's not to say you're not allowed. If you're running a Democratic Party, you can talk to whoever you want, but that's not going to get you to the win in the Democratic Party, right? Whereas if we start this process earlier, we know that if you vote in a primary and are engaged, you're more likely to vote in a general election. There's also this idea of getting to the bottom of who's who. A lot of voter ID can be done on different kinds of folks for the general election. But when we engage voters, they're more likely to engage in the system. And it's up to candidates to kind of do this and figure out who's who. So we just need a structure in place that gives them the opportunity to do that. Case in point was the 2018 CD2 primary, right? That was probably the most robust congressional primary I have seen for CD2. I think you had about 8 candidates. And talking to different candidates, from what I remember correctly, there was a lot of frustration because folks knew that in order to win this general election, if there was any chance at it, folks need to be talking to non-affiliated voters. But also, that was a bad campaign strategy based on the closed primary, right? Folks were working to more high vote propensity Democrats to win that primary. And whereas this opportunity with all of these resources, I mean, there were uh, lots of folks who were raising way more money than candidates had before. We're talking about multiple candidates. And those resources, though, were not put towards non-affiliated voters because it didn't make sense from a campaign perspective. So what we want is to give candidates opportunities to do this with hoping, and they do the smart thing, right? Like, okay, like, yes, I need to get through the primary. Yes, there's an opportunity now. It does work well in the primary to talk to these voters and get them engaged. And oh, this helps everybody, regardless of who goes to the general election. Um, which leads kind of to the next point, building capacity for the future, right? As a party, it's about winning the elections right now, but also looking ahead to the future and engaging voters consistently. And the more you do it, the better off you are. We see this in nonpartisan races. We do a lot with school board races, or did this last year, right? So we were actively engaged in the Redmond School Board. It was a conservative majority. So our objective in a district, by the way, which is a plus 27 Republican advantage, we needed to win 2 races to flip that board to a Democratic majority. Um, and I'm not going to get into how we targeted and who we talked to, but I will say the candidates that won are very solid, strong Democrats on the left. Um, and and this is public information. If you look at the vote total, clearly they won all the Democrats. But they also, one of the candidates in particular, either won every single non-affiliated voter or a big chunk of Republicans or a little mix of both. because there was also this opportunity where we knew talking to non-affiliated voters was what was going to push these candidates past the finish line. And guess what? They were allowed to vote in this system because they're nonpartisan, right? So that's kind of an example in a very red area, which is in the most of it, I think almost all of it is in the second congressional district, right? Another example, Crooked River Ranch is a part of that district. Republicans outnumber Democrats by I think like 3 to 1. These candidates won one of them by 20 points, another by 15 points, right? This had a lot to do with talking to non-affiliated voters, and these weren't folks who were compromising their democratic values, not in the least. If anything, going into it, they took some heat for being too democratic, leaning on their messaging, right? And it worked, but it's about talking to folks. So I think that kind of sums it up outside of the question and answer. So.
Thanks, Brian. So I heard a couple interesting things in there. One is that this is arguably a way to increase voter turnout in the November election by getting them to vote in the May election. Is that correct? That people
Yeah,
tend to continue the habit of voting. So if you're not if you're enfranchising them in May, you'll see their vote in November more frequently. Is that right?
correct. Yes.
That's cool. And then the other one that is an interesting concept for us to hold on to is that it will force is a strong word, but candidates can innovate knowing that they're going to be addressing potential NAV voters in the primary. And we're going to be having this very interesting CD2 congressional primary with at least 4 candidates in it. And so it invites one or more of them to try a different strategy, and then we learn together how those strategies are going to work.
Yeah. So that's the other to that point. With a reform, the idea is to change kind of the contours of what candidates do, right? And they're allowed to do. And to your point, I like the word innovate because then what you should typically see, and it doesn't always happen this way, but typically candidates start as like say players in a game, they start learning the right moves, doing the smart thing in order to get to that win, right? And so. The answer is yes to what you just said. Like, really, we want to, in my view, change the structure of this game for folks to be doing things differently. And like I said, they want to do things differently, in my experience. It's just they know that it's not rational in a primary environment in the moment where they're worried about just winning here.
Yeah.
Whereas they know that if they had all the resources in the world, they'd be doing all those things with their eyes on November as well, right? So.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, so a lot of people have asked this question, including Brad and a couple other people. So can you walk through on your understanding, because I mean, all we have is that resolution, which was written by another person in this room, but can you walk through how this process is going to work? How are people going to get a ballot and vote in the Democratic primary?
Yeah, so I actually I've talked to some elections administrators on this, and I haven't talked directly to the Secretary of State, but some county elections administrators. And the process, because this has not been done in a while, right? I think Republicans did it 10, 12 years ago, something like that, was the last
2012.
time, 2012. But essentially, the process is the Secretary of State or in counties, through counties, would send out kind of is what they're saying is inform non-affiliated voters, hey, you have the opportunity, just so you know, to vote in the Democratic primary. So that is what I've heard from election administrators. But what there will be is this process of an opt-in after that, where there will be some sort of form that folks have to fill out. So obviously, in an ideal world, and this is important for the future, we want to just make it automatic where folks get a ballot, right? And they have that choice and easy. So, but there will be this logistical hurdle of having to actually turn in a form. And this is where campaigns come in, right?
Mm,
Where if campaigns are smart and they're talking to folks, you get somebody locked down at the door and then fill this form out, right? But they will have to fill a
mm,
form out, and then there will probably be a deadline to do that. And then those folks will get a ballot to vote in the Democratic primary,
nice.
best of
I'm
my
gonna
knowledge. So,
Yeah, I'm going to follow that with Bridget Bailey's question. And this, for those who don't know, Brian Smith is aware of a lot of numbers. So I'm going to ask him a challenging one. What percentage of non-affiliated CD2 voters do you expect would participate in the primary like this?
Um, can't make a prediction on that because it's never happened before, right?
All
And
right.
the time, so when let's look at some numbers. When this did happen, I think for the Democrats in particular, I think I saw 1998 and maybe 2000, right?
Correct.
Um, if you go to the Secretary of State's history, it doesn't go back that far. It goes back to
Oh,
2000. It goes back to 2001. But let's look at some numbers from 2001. And this is not CD2, it is the whole state. But we know that the whole state compared to 2001 compared to today will inform CD2. Just those numbers, there's like 1.9 million voters. Um, 417,000 were non-affiliated. That's 21.7%. 751,000-ish or 39.1% were Democrats, and then 608, almost 690,000 or 35.9% Republicans. That was 2021, right? Where partisan numbers were, let's see, 60, 74, 75% were partisans, Republican or Democrat of all voters. Let's go to right now, just the numbers just released by the Secretary of State for December. I think we have 3,063,747 voters. 1,134,971 are non-affiliated. That is 37%. That is the plurality of voters now. Democrats are at 32%. Republicans are at just a tick under 24%. Right. So
point of clarification, is that apples to apples? Are those registered voters, not voters?
registered voters. Yeah, yeah.
Both of those are registered voters. Okay.
But they're registered, so not turnout. But the point is difficult based on who non-affiliated voters are now compared to when this was last happened. We can't make predictions on this, and it's not, and we can't compare it to other states because other states, we looked at all those lists, all of those different states. I don't know how many of those actually have automatic voter registration. Probably, I'd be surprised if more than a few did. I don't know the numbers on that. Maybe none of them actually. So that will make it fundamentally different on let's see, Alabama, Arkansas, and I don't think a
Hawaii?
single one of them.
Doesn't
Hmm,
Hawaii?
I don't know. I'm looking at
Okay.
most of these so it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
To make a prediction on that. So
Hey, can I just interrupt a little bit? We have like 12 questions in the queue. So I'm wondering if is there a way to kind of be brief and
Sure.
get to those?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
I'm threading a
not
lot
being
of them in. Kathleen, I'm threading a lot of them in as we go through these.
oh,
So I am answering some of them as we go. And in fact, Brian just answered one, which was, is there a comparable state? And he says no. Um, so so yes, we will get through as much of this as possible. So and so that's the useful thing that allows us to kind of move forward. We don't really have a good way of predicting then what the exact outcome is going to be, obviously on this sort of a thing. But you
yeah,
did mention,
not based empirically. We can I can make as far as what don't know empirically. No, there is no inductive argument I could make as far as what would happen. So
nice,
maybe deductive.
cool.
So.
Do you know why, or can you speak at all to why the Democratic Party? So the Democratic Party of Oregon opened its primary in 98 and 2000 and then stopped. The Republican Party had an open primary just like this in 2012 only. Do you have any idea why we stopped doing that?
No, but it goes back to those numbers. My guess would be it's a relatively much smaller proportion, right?
Mm,
Where is there a need to do this? And for me, I'd
gotcha.
like to frame this discussion on is there a need? So all of these voters I mentioned, there are plenty of Democratic leaning non-affiliated voters. I would argue statewide, the majority, well, we know statewide actually, the majority of non-affiliated voters vote Democratic. Um, and there are metrics on the aggregate precinct level, which validate that, right? Now in
Hmm.
CD2, it does go the other way. So it's a question of which ones do you want to engage. And it really depends on where you go to the precinct level. There are ways to identify with certain probabilities on chunks of non-affiliated voters. I mentioned Ashland, right? If you go in there, 90% of those folks are going to be voting Democratic if they voted in a general election,
Hmm.
right? So if you go to Warm Springs, the same thing, right?
Hmm.
It but it's up to campaigns. We expect them to have the sophistication to figure this out. They don't always do
Hmm.
it. It takes resources. They can't always, hire folks who can do this, but it depends. Um, but uh, for the one thing we want to think about is folks are just not registering in the party. And this is where this is a values choice for a lot of folks. Like, is it where you just don't believe the party should open up to folks because they should register as Democrats? And I do respect that line of thought. But I also want folks to think about what is the other goal of, in the long run, pushing an agenda, getting Democrats elected.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
have the plurality of voters who are just out there. They are not joining the party for whatever reason. And that's a whole other discussion, right? We've got 12 questions. We're not going to address that issue, but happy to talk to anybody about what my thoughts are on that. But what are you doing as a party to help give opportunities to engage these voters so that you're winning more elections in the long run, right?
Interesting. Yeah. We're going to get into that with some of the questions a little bit. We are going to drill into that a little bit. But before we do, I think it's very important to cover this. Many people have asked this, including the Cernes and myself. And this is where the name Ted Kulongoski is going to come up. Can you speak a little bit about this and other things that are also called open primaries that are being discussed? And I mean, try to be as brief as possible on this topic. But
Yeah.
um,
So I think in the common vernacular, there are different kinds of open primaries. But to my knowledge, from the academic perspective, this is an open primary. These other ones that people are referring to as open primaries, it's a top two primary. It could be a top five primary. It could be a jungle primary. That is fundamentally different than what we're talking about here, right? Totally different. So what Kolongoski, the ballot measure concept that I think they're attempting getting signatures for. The way this would work is that they would just open it all up in the primary, and then, and I'm unclear, but I think it's the top two would go to the general election, and that would
yeah.
be different maybe from a jungle primary in the sense that in a jungle primary, if somebody gets 50% plus one, it's done. And I don't know if that's the case, but either way, I think the concept is top two go to the general election, regardless of party, right? And
Hmm.
everybody gets to vote. That is different from this. I will say, as an organization, we think that kind of primary is problematic when our objective is voter enfranchisement. We think that has the opportunity to actually disenfranchise voters for a number of reasons, and I don't know if you want me to get into that in this context, but it's different. We are for the open primary, for the Democratic primary, and the top two primary is different, or uh, and maybe it's worth to start that language. Open primary, top two primary. Think of them as separate
Optimally, yeah.
things, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I think everybody wants the positive sound of open, so it's utilized by a lot of people. But yeah, thank you
Yep.
for that clarification. I wanted to circle back. Bill Thornhill has very kindly done some internet research for us. Both Minnesota and Michigan have some version of automatic voter registration.
Okay.
And they are
So
also ones that have these have primary they are listed on this thing, which was from Ballotpedia of states where people now can vote in party primaries. So there is possibly some data there. If anybody knows any secretaries of state in those areas, we can talk to them.
so further
Um,
research then would be Minnesota and Michigan. No.
yeah, right. Um, so this question is Uh, it's from Kathleen, but I'll read it anyway. So we already have a very low Democratic numbers because of Kate Brown's motor voter bill. I think what she's alluding to, and she can nod here, is that there are nabs who are definitely Democrats who just were not asked whether they were Democrats. So it seemed like at the time, but it served to disenfranchise a huge population because now they do not get ballots in the primary in May. So people are often suspicious because they don't see primary candidates on their ballots, but they weren't aware of that in advance. If we adopt this resolution, what safeguards in place to truly create an opportunity for NAVs without compromising democratic values?
Well, to my knowledge, when the DMV reaches out to you, registers you, it gives you the option of also choosing a party.
Hmm.
I've seen that on my card.
Oh, okay. I could be wrong. I was told
Yeah.
otherwise.
So in that sense, then it would not be a disenfranchising mechanism for Democrats, simply because when they say, "Hey, you can register," you can also register as a party. Most folks just ignore it, and even folks that don't want to be registered because it's that kind of the psychology behind that is because they also ignore it. They're also registered, right? But there's that option that I've seen on the card, and I don't know if somebody's familiar in the Q&A could pop in there, but I don't um I'm not sure it was a disenfranchising mechanism, and it would be dependent on that fact right there,
Hmm.
right? So,
Gotcha. Thank you.
but safeguards, right? The follow-up, could you repeat what the follow-up would be as far as safeguards or what that question was?
What safeguards are in place to create an opportunity for NAVs that doesn't compromise our democratic values?
So it it
By democratic, this is clearly Democratic Party, not
it in
democratic
the
writ
sense
large.
meaning they're going to be essentially diluting who candidates are as far as their democratic values. If that's the right way to, are we worried about hey,
So
right-wing
can I
Democrats getting elected or
can I
Kathleen.
clarify that? Can I clarify that? And maybe I didn't write the question like I should have. But what I'm concerned about is, or what I'm interested in understanding is what the protections are that make this that kind of keep this clean and keep it connected to the Democratic ballot that don't bleed into like the I don't know, the kind of jungle primary stuff that Kulongoski's talking about. Because I think some of us have real reservations about is this the kind of thing that's going to become that? And so it's like, what kind of protections will we have, and what kind of safeguards are there to
yep.
protect that ballot and its integrity?
Yeah, so um like it is a choice for any non-affiliated voter to engage in the primary. So do we have a guarantee that the more conservative non-affiliated voters will stay out of the primary? We do not. But what we do have is evidence actually from all states going back decades, right? Political scientists have always been skeptical of candidates going through open primaries, not top two primaries, coming out and being something different than candidates in closed primaries. And so there's just an evidence to support that who gets out of that primary is different, if that's what you mean by compromising kind of what's going on. Now, if we are talking about the jungle primary, top two primary, there are issues there, right? That's definitely one reason why we're against that. But that is not this. So essentially, we're still talking about folks who are within the Democratic Party, who are running against each other. So candidates running still have to be Democrats, right? In your Democratic primary. The only difference is now, like many other states, we're looking at them right here. You're letting non-affiliated voters vote in those primaries, and in the literature that I've seen, there isn't evidence that there has been an issue with this. As far as getting candidates elected who are not values aligned with the Democratic Party.
Uh, Thank you. There's actually a couple questions that follow this, and I'm going to kind of bring them together. So I'm going to ask them all, and you'll see that they're um, well. For one thing, you did already kind of answer. Are we concerned about Republican strategy switching to unaffiliated and diluting our best candidate? You're saying there's no data that has been successful in the past, or that
Yeah,
somebody
I mean
would put the effort for.
it's yeah, there isn't evidence, meaning substantial evidence. Like
Yeah.
basically, the academics are skeptical on their evidence. And when you look at the candidates who make it to these primaries, they're no different
Mhm.
than folks in other. Really, it depends on. So nothing's happened where, like, because you've heard these stories, right, where Republicans will jump in this primary And I'm not saying that Republicans are incapable of shenanigans. We know they are, right? But they're this, particularly, and we talked about this in CD2. I think in a House or Senate district, there was no Democrat who ran, so the Republican did a write-in campaign on the Democratic side to make sure he was the only one Republican or Democrat on the ballot. So they will do stuff if it's easy. That's an easy thing to do. You only need a few write-ins, right? But to go in and just have a substantial amount of Republican voters, they have to switch to non-affiliated or finding the right conservative non-affiliated voters just to swamp that primary. This is something. The resources this would take, they have other places to put their resources, right? I'm not saying they're the smartest folks. However, I think they're not that dumb as far as just
Yeah,
to do this. So
great.
I don't think
Okay,
we've
so
seen
here's
this anywhere.
yeah.
So
Here's the one of the big questions, and this room is filled with Democratic activists. We work very hard for things like our platform, our bylaws, our rigor, our candidates. Will it disempower registered Democrats? Or put differently, why should we let folks unfamiliar with our platform choose our candidates?
um, well, I disagree with the premise, right? As I stated before, you go into a lot of areas, depending on where you are, folks know what their values are. So here's the thing, fun. So this is another fact. I actually, well, not a fact. Like one of our other positions is we actually don't believe in making a position nonpartisan. We think that we should be able to identify who Republicans, Democrats are overall. Now, I will say there are opportunities in conservative areas to get folks elected because of the nonpartisan format, but that is also a disenfranchising mechanism. And what that means is that voters, almost all of them, are looking for D or R, regardless of they're non-affiliated or Democrat. So these non-affiliated voters are actually the ones that are voting Democratic are looking for that D as a signal. That means they have those values. That means the Democratic brand, and it's this weird contradiction, although they don't want to join the party system, right? And they're opposed to that. But deep in their psychology, they know that when there's a head-to-head matchup, most folks between Republican and Democrat, even if you're non-affiliated, that is giving you all the information you need to vote. That means those folks are her values aligned. Now it's a question of our candidates finding the right folks, right? And they should be, right? Because their job is to get elected. So they shouldn't be looking for folks that are not values aligned to go into the primary, because this is what this will take is for folks to kind of engage these voters, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So there's a couple questions in here about how this is going to be implemented. Have you thought much about how we would identify now voters and get them to request the ballot? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you're a campaign, I think it's pretty basic. You have to talk to voters. You got to go to the door. You got to get them on the phone. You got to text them. All basic campaign tools. And this is where on the Democratic Party you have PCPs, you have NLP, right? You might maybe expand upon just talking to Democrats and going in. First off, you talk to non-affiliated voters that live with Democrats. That's an easy one, right? You know that 80% of the time they vote Democratic. So talk to them first. Be like, do you want to vote just like, your parents in this household or maybe your roommates are in this primary for these candidates? You got to fill this form out to do that. But the best folks to do this are the actual candidates themselves and their campaigns in that outreach. And obviously, they're not going to be resourced to do it all. But what this would do is now that the opportunity there is to engage these folks, it would be up to candidates to then engage these folks. And that's what candidates do, right? Let them go to work to do the same thing with voter ID. Every time candidates are doing voter ID, those IDs are in a composite score. We don't get to necessarily see that they're identified by, whatever candidate, but it becomes a part of a composite score. This is the same thing with this kind of voter engagement, just like it is in the general election, where we don't need to ID Democrats. We know how they vote, 95% certainty. Folks are trying to identify non-affiliated voters. So this is just now what happened in the primary as well. So.
mhm. That raises an issue. You're talking about candidates not being able to afford to hire the person to do this. And I also am thinking about the party, and other people are asking about kind of the complexities of this. This has a cost, and as a result, it has a cost benefit ratio. Some of that cost is going to be shouldered by the Secretary of State, it sounds like,
Mhm.
but some of it's going to be shouldered by the state party, possibly the county parties, God, I hope not, and candidates who are going to have to choose to do this. Do you have a sense of where the payoff is there? I mean, you know, in campaigns, you
Yeah.
do things that are going to get you wins. You're not going to do things that don't get you wins.
Yeah, I would argue that good democracy is not easy democracy, first and foremost, right? And it's not cheap democracy necessarily. I am mindful of costs, but because we hear this argument, particularly with a lot of reforms from clerks, where they're like, "Oh, who's going to pay for this?" Right? And I same thing. I'm like, well, yes, like democratic reforms cost money, right? Automatic voter registration, which is one of the greatest things we've seen as far as voter enfranchisement, that did cost money. It will. Right. And if we wanted to lower the cost overall, move backwards, this would disenfranchise more voters, which does not put the Democrats at an advantage. Right. As far as the cost mechanism from the Secretary of State footing the bill, this is taxpayer money. Most people paying for the Democratic primary are not Democrats. Right. So there is that argument to address that cost issue.
Mm,
Um, so this is all primaries are footed by all taxpayers, and the plurality of these taxpayers are not affiliated, right?
hmm.
Um,
But
so
to section two of the, I'm sorry if you're, I thought you were wrapping there.
yeah, section two. No, I was going to actually talk about now. The second one is the party. Yes, so it that will cost the party to do this, and there are always trade-offs. Um, I have another argument, particularly being in the consulting world for so long. I think that sometimes money is spent too much on certain things, right? Like media buys, where you're just hammering the market. I mean, I've seen some campaigns spend like 12, 13, $14 per individual voter in the whole voting universe, right? And we've seen this where just the markets are flooded. And I think there are questions like, is this too much? So we think about where money is spent, and I would argue that is misallocated, but there's an incentive system to do that. We're changing kind of the structure of where the opportunities are now to spend your money is one way to think about it. So
Mm, excellent.
all of it's gonna cost money. So
Yeah. An interesting thing to consider. Okay, here's two binary questions. Is it more or less likely to moderate candidates in their positions to avoid the perception of political party bias? Is it
you mean is the
more or less
primary?
likely to moderate candidates in their positions?
I There might, so it's tough to predict. Overall, like I said, the evidence says nationwide that candidates aren't different, which means it has not had a moderating effect nationwide. I would say statewide, same thing. You could argue, particularly in Portland, or depending on where you are in Eugene, you have a primary opponent coming from the left of an incumbent. They know that those younger non-affiliated voters are to the far left of some of the Democratic incumbents, right? So this could have the effect of making them even more progressive, right? But CD2, we don't know. And the reason ordinarily, I would say it's probably a wash, depending, because folks are going after those non-affiliated voters who they've targeted. But also, there might be this weird glitch where because none of the CD2 candidates are resourced, which could happen. Donors are going to look at that and say, "Why would I put my like this is the one of the reddest districts, right?" And so they might think this is not winnable. They're having a hard time getting resources, and so what a campaign might do is like, let's go after the high vote propensity non-affiliated voters, and if they start going after the more conservative ones, that could potentially have a moderating effect on the candidate's messaging.
Mm,
But that is something that I wouldn't want to predict. I would say overall, this would not
mm.
have an effect. CD2 might be a special case, but also if I'm running in CD2, I'm going after Ashland non-affiliated voters, right?
I was going to say, so you could take this, one candidate could take this and hit Eastern Oregon University, Western Oregon University, Southern
Mm.
Oregon
Yep.
University, uh, the tech school in Klamath Falls, and rack up a bunch of non-affiliated voters that are younger and more progressive. Another one could go to um, Warm Springs, to the Latino
Yep.
community, and pick up people who are
Yep.
maybe more religious and have different agendas. Like you could get
Yep.
both.
And so what this looks like is that it kind of just looks like a primary then, right? Where you do have different kinds of Democrats, right? And then what's the upside? Well, you just mentioned we're talking to young folks. We're talking to POC, right? Who are all non-affiliated, right?
Hmm.
And you're engaging folks who are rarely engaged in primaries. So
Yeah. Next two option question. Is it more or less likely that opening our primary will energize young and disenfranchised voters?
um it
That sounds like a
depends.
softball down the middle, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
no, overall, yes. I will say in this context, particularly so CD2 might be something different if you have a competitive primary and folks can really get going, right? I will say what we would hope for in a test case is that you have a competitive gubernatorial primary or multiple competitive congressional primaries, right?
Mhm.
So that candidates are like, oh, like remember it was at 2022. What did you have? Like 15, 18 Democrats running or something like that, right? Like imagine that as far as a test case and what folks can do, right? Where if you have that many candidates and let's say you're like fourth or fifth down and you're like, you know what? I think a lot of folks who are older and high vote propensity, I know I can't win that vote. Maybe I should go after some younger, more progressive, left-leaning folks, right? That are not affiliated in Portland or someplace, or someplace like that. Uh, but I think, um, wait, go back to, sorry, I just digressed. What was the original question?
Energizing young and disenfranchised
Yeah.
voters? Question mark.
Yes. Yes. No, this absolutely has the potential to do that. And it's important though to communicate this to a lot of candidates. Be like, hey, here are some opportunities here, particularly for folks who are inexperienced running, right? Or they might not have they can't afford to hire experienced campaign staff. Folks are going to need general direction from the Democratic Party, I think. So.
Hmm. Great. Thank you for that answer. Um, So a couple people have questions that are akin to this. There's a lot of other conversations people are having. We just had a statewide election on ranked choice voting, which did not pass. And there's the open primary thing. Or sorry, shoot. I'm sorry, Brian. I feel like I've done that wrong. There's the top two primary conversation that's going to be on the ballot most likely. I think probably in May, right? So does this move the conversation forward for ranked choice voting? Does it move the conversation forward for a more permanent change in the way voting works?
I don't know. I wouldn't put too much into this particular reform, just opening your primary, because this is something that you looked at the list of states that do that, right? So, I mean, full disclosure, we think from an organizational standpoint, and there are different kinds of ranked choice voting. So, if we're talking about single winner, which was Measure 117, uh, we were on that state committee, and we are proponents of just moving everything. If you want to talk about making it cheaper and engaging all voters and eliminating primaries and runoffs all in one ranked choice voting, general election, eliminate the primaries, and everybody does it, right? Not just say, oh, legislative candidates don't do it or this or that. But we're not there. That's not what this discussion is. That is pie in the sky at this point. It uh, moving as long as it's the right reform. Not all electoral reforms are the same, and not all are good reforms. If we think that it's going to move backwards and disenfranchise folks, we are against it, and we shouldn't have reform just for the sake of reform. I think this is something that is not controversial. A lot of folks do it, so it'll be more palatable. Um, but I think if and this is something where I think there's nothing to lose by testing this out, right? Like there's always risk to stuff. I feel this is a very low risk scenario to test this out once.
Hmm.
Um, if this is done consistently, um, we're confident that you would see more folks getting enfranchised and kind of uh, overall, right? And that is definitely gives folks more of an appetite to see the possibilities of certain kind of reforms if they understand why the reform worked, and that's important, right?
Yeah.
So yes, but also this isn't something that I think is just in one test case will be transformational across the board. I think we want to
Yeah.
look really. It'll be important to study this and kind of see what candidates are doing. and looking at the numbers, who was engaged, who normally weren't engaged, right, and see what happens in the general election. Like we want to
Yeah.
good time to analyze this, right? So
Yeah. I've lost it here. Oh yeah, Bill Thornhill commented that we have a difficult time identifying progressive leaning NAVs today. We're always trying to crack that. And it seems like this change would help us to do that because we would see the ones who chose to vote in
yep.
the primary and we can then target them in the general and ongoing. We can Van can save that information.
Yeah, and we talked about this, and we had some questions on what is public. And so what since then I looked into it and to confirm what my thoughts were. So the Secretary of State knows who votes in different primaries,
Hmm.
or would know. And then what you would want is the van administrator to request that information from the Secretary of
Right.
State and put it in
Cool.
van. So,
Cool. Well,
and then that's
we're
an ID.
doing, yeah. That's a very intriguing thing from the data
So to that
perspective.
point, going back to the cost saving argument, if campaigns know who they're talking to, they save a ton of money, right?
True.
It
And
becomes like we have no idea, so we have to put this blanket message and blast everybody. That gets really expensive. The more voter ID we have, the more we can profile voters or just know who they are without just by a voter ID. Now, the more that's done on a grand scale, races get significantly less expensive if folks are doing the right things. So,
a little upfront investment for a long-term savings. Oh, cool.
yeah, yeah.
I wanted to do a little bit of clarification based on some of the questions that are coming in here. We've got 5 minutes left, and I love ending close to on time. One person asks, are Oregon Republicans considering opening up their primary? And some other people are asking about kind of the process of this. And so I wanted to just quickly say, based on my research, the oh, and then also some of these states that have this, like you just show up at the ballot. Most of them don't have as much mail-in, and you just request a particular ballot. You request the Democrat or the Republican ballot. Here, you have to do this whole probably postcard option because of the way the Oregon Constitution is written. But each individual party can specify who is allowed to vote in the election. That's why we're able to change just the Democratic Party's election without changing the Republican Party's primary. Did I get that right, Brian?
Yeah, wait, so say that last part again.
The party itself can make this change.
Hmm.
This is not a law change. This is a DPO rule
Yes, yeah,
change,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So this does not have to go to a general vote or anything like that.
No.
So can this be, or how can we use this to appeal to non-affiliated voters more effectively and show that we're not an evil party as portrayed by far-right media outlets? And this, I think, this is going to be the last question, which we have covered a lot, but then I'll give you a chance to say a couple things. I'll say a couple things, and we'll
Yeah.
be out.
Really, I think it's about your candidates, right? And really, a party is only good as the candidates they put forward. And for there are a number of reasons why folks who are inclined to vote Democratic don't trust the system and don't like the Democratic Party. But when they do vote, they vote Democratic, right? And we saw this with the national election, where the shift in the electorate probably wasn't no so much like you can make an argument for some swing voters. Like, however, we know a lot of folks who vote Democratic sat it out, right? And a lot of them in this state, for instance, would be non-affiliated, who also vote Democratic. So what we want is a system where candidates are given the opportunity to reach out to them because now it makes sense. It's up to candidates to be like, here are the policies I'm about. Here's how I am, how these policies help your lives, right? So all these things, it really is this sort of communication, and we want to open those lines of communication. It is engagement, which in the long run is going to help kind of, see the trend line, right? And there are a number of other reforms that can help with this. This is just one, right? And it's not a silver bullet. But what this does do is address this issue of if anybody's going to be communicating to voters who are disengaged, who don't trust the system, who think the party label, they don't want to identify with it. Like I said, I've argued they actually still vote a certain way when they vote, right? Which means there's something going on where they still see those values. They just don't like saying I'm a Democrat, right? Um, it's going to be up to the candidates, and we need to make it easy for the candidates and give them this opportunity to do it, right? And I think we'll kind of see. You got 4 or 5 candidates. You said, let's see how that works out just in CD2. So
Right on. Quick yes or no answer from this one. This is Brad Cowder again. Would a registered independent, Green Party, Working Family, et cetera, affiliated voter be able to request a Democratic ballot?
I don't know the answer to that. It says specifically not affiliated voters, right?
I'm pretty
So
sure
those
that
folks are
means no
affiliated.
right there,
Yeah.
but
No.
I'm not 100% confident, but my confidence is very much in the 90s. Well, thank you, Brian. You are a font of information, and thanks everybody who's shown up for this. Um, I personally want to see STC delegates who are more informed when they show up to STC quarterly meetings, and I feel like this has gone a long way towards that. Um, I do not think that this should be your only bit of research on this important issue, though. I want to encourage everybody to look farther into a variety of things. Brian knows a lot, but there's a lot of other points of view and a lot of other things you can dig into on this. And let's keep the conversation going and be as informed as we can when we go there. Delegates, I'll see you at the State Central Committee. If you're not a delegate, you can find out who your delegate is and you can call them up, and you should call them up and let them know how you feel about this very important resolution. Let's Democrat here. And then, let's win. Kathleen, do you have anything to close on? Surprise. You didn't know I was going to ask you that.
No, just thanks everybody.
Yeah.
This was a great conversation. I seems like we probably needed 4 hours, but thank God we're not doing that. And we can
Yeah.
chat. Please let's call each other.
Yeah, let's keep it up. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. This has been recorded, and we will find a way to make it available and socialize that for other people who aren't able to make it. And I hope we can do stuff like this more often in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will stay on while people blobber on. I don't know if you guys want to do any post-game conversation, but
We
I
could. I've got to respond to a bunch of emails from
go ahead and
work
drop off
today.
then,
Yeah,
Brian. Don't worry
yeah,
about it.
yeah, yeah. So that's all
Yeah,
right. But yeah,
cool.
thanks for this opportunity. Appreciate it. So,
It was
um,
badass, Brian. Appreciate it.
yeah, it's fun. It's
Yeah,
fun. So, all right.
yeah, yeah,
Talk to you later. See you later,
yeah.
Randy.
Fun stuff, Randy. We should do this all the time. You're muted.
You've closed out the meeting, Joel?
It's still running. I don't know. Is there a way I can just like send everybody home here?
Well, you want to stop recording, first of all.
Oh, okay. Thanks for your patience with me. Where do I, pause, stop recording. Stop recording.